Welcome, citizens of the globe, to the Frontend Heroes podcast, where we discuss all things villainous and heroic about the front end of software development. My name is Evan Payne. I'm a senior front-end developer at Actimo, and with me, as always, is my co-host, Scott Francis, a senior front-end engineer at Porsche. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, yeah, really good. Glad to be here again, Evan. Nice to see you. Super excited for today's guest. I have a colleague who tells me that she is amazing, and I believe she's got more titles than who am I going to say? Muhammad Ali.
And well deserved as well.
Well, of course. How are you?
Nice. I'm good. It's good to be home. I'm still sort of relishing in the fact after a long summer away, so that's very positive. And it's starting to get away from summer, and the weather is cooling but not cold because it's nice where we live.
Best time of the year, the weather cools down and it starts feeling. For me, it's always the time that it feels like things are like ready to start again. Like I know people like look at like the beginning of the year, but for me, like a little bit of this is getting rid of the kids back to school after the summer holidays, and then like you can actually start concentrating at work and stuff. And it's like nice time of the year.
Yeah, pretty awesome. Right, so today's episode is sponsored by NetCentric, an award-winning Adobe Global Alliance partner and consultancy headquartered in Switzerland with offices all over Europe as well as Pune, India. They are hiring for a number of roles, so if you're looking to get into a consultancy, that's pretty great. Check them out. We are, as ever, so glad to have their support with this show. So today's guest, you might have seen around the internet or heard of. Her name is Debbie O'Brien. She is head developer advocate at bit.dev, and Github Star, recently acquired, I understand, Google developer expert, Microsoft MVP, many more accolades to her disposal. So Debbie, welcome. Can you introduce yourself and maybe let us know a bit about how you got into the tech scene to begin with?
Hey everyone. Hey guys. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Debbie O'Brien. I'm Irish, but living in Mallorca because it's sunnier, because, that's what you do, although it's cloudy today. And how did I get started in tech? That is such a long story. We'd be here for like an hour and a half just talking about that. Quick version, I started in tech in 1997 or something like that, back in the years when the internet was really rubbish. So I learned how to build a website before we even had the internet, even in the college. So that's, hardcore days. And obviously I got bored, so I moved to Spain to be an entertainer on a stage and have fun instead. And I was working for many years in Spain, unemployed in the winter, so I went back to studying, tried to get back into web design, started building Flash websites, WordPress websites. Things kept changing in tech. It was very hard to get a job because I live on a small island, so you're very limited to the kind of work you can do, and remote working wasn't a thing, especially in Spain. So I went to teaching English, and I was teaching English for ages, then went back into front-end development. And I was a very good front-end developer in HTML and CSS, the typical old-school front-end developer who then passes it to the JavaScript person, the real programmer, who makes it all dynamic and makes it all cool. I could never do that, except I did add jQuery once. I was very proud of that moment. Then I became unemployable because the front-end developer role had changed, and I hadn't, changed with the times. So I went back to studying and basically took almost a year out, 9 months out, to just study full-time and try and learn JavaScript, try and make it back into programming, to be a proper programmer. I wanted to be a real programmer. And that was just over 4 years ago. And it's been incredible what's happened in the last 4 years. It's just mind-blowing.
I mean, I remember when you and I first met, you came to something we were hosting at NetCentric at the time, like a meetup or something. And it might have been another meetup we met at before then. Regardless, you were super present in these sort of meetups and tech scenes and constantly learning. But what always impressed me was also immediately returning and sharing that knowledge back as well. So just cycling it around. Was that kind of part of your own learning strategy to keep yourself moving fast?
Yeah, so I think I studied with Open Classrooms and with Treehouse. And they're two different platforms, but very similar in the sense of they kind of ensure that you're helping other people. So while you're learning, you're actually helping others. So we had the Slack channel, for example, where you had to do peer reviews. And at first I kind of thought you want me to do peer reviews? You want me to review someone else's code because you couldn't be bothered to pay someone to do it? And I got very I'm not doing that for you. That's free work and stuff. But actually, they're giving the students a chance to review someone else's code, to kind of like say, hey, this is really, really good, but you could do this better. And you learn a lot of skills by reviewing someone else's code, right? And I end up like improving my code a lot because I end up just like helping so many people. I won the badge for the most peer reviews. I think I did over 100 peer reviews and like got a badge for it. I was the most peer reviewed student in the whole program. And I made it my thing that every day, the first thing I did in the morning was review someone else's project. And I made it like I do that first, then I do my own work. Because then when I got stuck, and I got stuck quite a lot, I didn't feel so guilty asking for help because I'd already helped people. And that was kind of like my way of doing something. I don't mind helping people. I love helping people, but I also need help as well. And if you don't help people and you just ask for help, then it's kind of like a one-way thing, and it needs to be two-way.
What I really like about that too is that's a skill that they don't normally talk about or promote very much, at least until you get up to like senior levels and such. And even then, it's sort of, you have to do it. You're not being taught how to do it. But it's a really important skill to be able to put aside what you were doing. When you're coding, you can get deep into like all of the little weird eccentricities about the code base, but put that aside and try and figure out what the context of this merge request is, right?
Yeah.
That's a hard thing to do. And doing that every morning, I mean, that's also really teaches you to intuit and quickly kind of, spot patterns just for your own sanity, I guess.
Yeah, but I did learn the hard way because, I went to a job interview and they had this, that typical horrible job interview. They sit you in front of three people and then they give you a computer with a big massive screen and they're watching everything you type and you have to like, do something and your like fingers don't remember anything and everything just goes out the window. And I just freaked out because I didn't know this code base. I didn't know anything. And I just wanted like the ground to swallow me up. But I walked out of that interview basically kind of thinking, I'm never going to look at someone else's code again and freak out. I'm going to actually just get used to looking at strange and different code bases and being able to read them. And that was my thing. I've said, right, from now on, every single day, I'm going to do this until I, get a job eventually.
That's pretty amazing. I mean, like I personally, I hate those types of interviews, and like now I find myself interviewing people, like, and the last thing that I would do is like put a challenge like that. I mean, like I know even just from coding, like not in an interview, as soon as somebody's watching me, like I'm like, oh my God, like I've been doing this forever and I don't remember like what this does or why it would do it or like what am I going to use here. Just completely, like that situation completely destroys me. I think that your approach though with like doing something every morning, I kind of do that with code reviews anyway, like even as like part of the job. I find it's a nice in for the day. Right, like it's like you're into the code, like you're not straight away doing something yourself, but just reviewing something, and it's like, again, it's like a nice task to tick off for the day. Like actually, yeah, we've got something there we can find, and then the person who comes into work, then they have something to adjust in their pull request, and like it's a good approach.
And when you're learning as well, it really refreshes you, right? Because I was on project 9, but I'm reviewing something from project 1. I don't even remember how to build project 1 again, right? So you kind of like starting to refresh the memories of, oh, I remember doing that. Or you look at your code base to kind of see, what did I do? How can I best explain to them where they're going wrong without telling them they're going wrong, but pointing them in the right direction, right? Because you don't want to give them the answers. You want to just say, oh, how did you think about looking at this, and send them a link to kind of some post on it. But yeah, you're constantly reviewing different levels of code and different kind of examples and stuff. And it's really important. It's a great skill. So anyone who has the chance and the opportunity to do it, highly encourage you to.
Yeah, when I'm working on my own stuff, what I tend to do is I have a little, it's not hard and fast, but I have this rule where I check through the components or routes or whatever it might be, and say like, okay, what's the thing that I haven't touched in the longest here? And I'll review that as if it were a self-contained thing. And it's because I remember one of my mentors was like, you shouldn't ever say, let's put this off, we'll refactor it later, because you'll never refactor. And I was like, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to always make time to refactor and keep things going. And sometimes it ends up being a complete waste of time, or it ends up being like, I've over-engineered this thing in trying to refactor it. But other times it keeps you up to date. You're like, oh, I used to do arrays this way. I used to do array manipulation this way. I've learned a new technique. Let me plug that into this old part of the code base and just try and keep it up to date. So that's something for people that are working on smaller projects. It helps as well. I guess we'll segue a little bit into today's show title, and I imagine we'll talk about various different things around this topic. But the show title I chose this time was Ant-Man and the Wasp. I wanted to be sort of both genders represented, and not just do Ant-Man, but this idea of the incredible shrinking superhero. And I thought it appropriate, given your current role at BIT and this sense of, drilling down into what is the most composable piece of infrastructure within your front-end world that you can. I think that's what it is anyway. You can tell me if that's correct or not, and then we can go from there of what BIT is, and I'm sure we'll have questions.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Ant-Man and the Wasp is good. Because then you can fly, the components can fly anywhere you see, and they can be used everywhere. I love it. It's great. So yeah, what is BIT? It's very hard to kind of explain it in a very short amount of time. So I'm going to do my best. But basically, I would say it's if you want to build with component-driven development, if you want to think components first, then BIT is the tool for you to use. How do we build things normally? We build applications, right? So we take a repo, we build our application, we build our components in that application. And then what happens? We need to build another application. And now we've got all those components in that one application. And how do we reuse them in the second repo? Well, we either, create a monorepo structure, and then you've got this, absolute mess that sometimes you have to handle, or you basically start to kind of publish a whole library. And now you've got this whole library of components that you have to maintain and use in all those other applications and repos you want to use. Or you could, individually put one into NPM, but then you'd have to, manage all the package JSONs for each one of those, etc. And obviously then there are kind of tools out there, workspace tools and stuff to manage monorepos, but it's still not a perfect solution. So the solution that we have is BIT, which is basically a way for you to very easily make one component so easy to share across many repos. And they do that by basically they manage all the kind of packaging for you. So you don't have any package JSON to manage. It's just automatically created. You can create your component in what we call a workspace, and you can have a workspace that's then exporting to different scopes. And you can then basically share your components across multiple repos, multiple applications. You can even just use it in a Next.js application, a Gatsby application, just by using Yarn or NPM, because it's now a kind of package with its package manager, all its dependencies, all the code needed for that to be able to work in isolation. So you can use it anywhere you want. And then there's a load of other cool things, like you can get to see the whole dependency graph. So you can look at one component and say, wow, this component, this product card component is made up of a button component, a price component, a heading component, an image component, all these other components. You can see the whole kind of dependency graph. You can see the tests that have passed for it. You can see the code. You can even inspect the code and say, wow, who wrote that? That's terrible. Or wow, that's amazing. I'm going to use that component. And you can see the composition. So how you can use it in different kind of states. The documentation, if the developer was very good and wrote good documentation, then it will show you and teach you how to use the component properly, all the props that you can use to make that, to use that component. And then there's other kind of cool things where you can, in your workspace, take a component from another workspace, another team, right? So teams are owning these components. So say me and you, Evan, are working for the same company, but we work on completely different repos, different scopes. And you have a component and there's a bug in it and you went on holidays, and I'm going to fix your component so I can import it into my repo, modify it, export a new version, and then just eject it out of my workspace, because really you own that component. I was just fixing something for you. I was helping you out. So there's great team collaboration as well, which is something we've never been able to do, right? You'd normally have to clone a whole repo. And instead, we're just importing the component, taking the component files, modifying them, exporting the new version, and then ejecting it from our workspace back to where it lives. So lots of kind of cool things you can do.
I mean, so it's a lot.
Yeah.
But why it's interesting to me is that it hits a lot of these topics that have been coming up in the front end over the last, 6 years or so. like design systems and component-driven architecture and monorepos, because dependencies get out of control, and build processes and web components and all of these hosts of suites. And, Scott can tell you, we talked for a while about like, well, we've got these Vue components and the client really wants to use them in a React project. I guess we do a web component kind of wrapper thing and maybe it'll work. And then you're doing micro front ends, and like these all sound like buzzwords because they are, right? But there's all these pain points. And what I love about the front end is that inevitably when you've got that, someone goes, I can do these things and bind together, and then boom, you've got Netlify, or boom, you've got Bit, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I need to investigate a little more. But that's a statement more than a question. But maybe, I'm interested to talk more about sort of the pain points that you've already mentioned, and maybe we go from there.
Yes.
So go ahead. If you have something,
like in previous jobs, I can just go by like the pain points I had in previous jobs, and we tried to build a similar thing like in the past. Like we had to resolve these issues where we had teams who owned different, they owned different features, right? And like they all made up the one website, the one application, which is a massive application. And because you have at the time, like it was very hard to manage things. So you had inconsistency. You had a button component, but you had a button, each team had a button component, for example, right? And then that button component across each application looked different. And yes, the application itself was made up of a team of like 6 different teams, but really the client doesn't really need to know about how the business is distributed. They just want to see a website that all looks the same. When they click on the next page, they don't want to get a different look and feel. They want to have that kind of confidence that this all looks the same and is consistent. So it's kind of solving those problems, but also solving the dependency and the versioning issues. And I worked on for companies where it's very hard to handle versioning. So people were creating versions and versions were out of control. You couldn't go back versions. You didn't know who was using what versions. You didn't know if you could deprecate components or not, because like you just didn't know where they were being used. So you just end up having like your component base just kept growing and growing. And then we couldn't find a better solution than to just like put the whole library up to NPM. So we just put the whole component library up there, and everyone has to download that component library, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's harder to manage, and it's a nightmare. And they're the kind of problems that Bit is, solving. It's about being able to let teams have ownership, work independently, but build something, the end product together. So the end product just consumes the components that it needs. The teams work independently, yet they kind of like, build together. So yeah, does that make sense?
It does. How do you, so if you actually, so you have these components and then you pull it into a project, like how does it, when the entire thing gets exported, like how does, if you're using like multiple, using the component like multiple times, like how does it go about like not duplicating the code? If they're all self-contained modules, how does it go about like not actually like having like lots of duplication?
Yeah, so basically like your component, if I can think of like kind of a more top level component, would be like say a product card grid, right? So this is the grid component, which is using the product card component, which is using the button component, which is using et cetera, et cetera. So they're all basically just, importing those components. Mm-hmm. So when you are building the application, it's going to need the components it's going to need, it's going to have them kind of ready because they're just going to pull them in. So it's got like a package JSON that it's going to like say, oh, I need this component, I need this, I need this. So then at like build time, when you're actually building the application is when it kind of like reads through this and sees, and the same with your like, peer dependencies or your dev dependencies, like Bit will also look at your dependencies. If anything's added in a docs file or a compositions file, then that's automatically going to be a dev dependency because you do not need that for the application to build. So it will just automatically go in there. Mm-hmm. So Bit kind of just manages all that for you, and you don't have to like worry about it. And I know that kind of sounds how, but why?
No, we've had previously on the show a few different people that have, or at least one person that was from NX, Brandon Roberts, who was talking about this, and I've talked about it a lot because I use it in both my work and my side project is the monorepo tooling of NX. But the impetus there is very similar. It's that, man, things are getting out of control. we really need a dependency graph, meaning we need to know when we do this build, what is importing what they're using, because then we can be efficient about whatever it is we're doing. In Bit's case, it seems to be we can be efficient about compiling the assets in such a way that we only include the CSS for a button one time, even though there's 30 buttons on the page. In NX's case, it's I don't have to rerun the build for this project at all because none of its dependencies were updated in this merge request. I mean, that they share that for sure. And again, you mentioned monorepo before as well, because that's this idea of there can be a lot of things going on at once, but it's all in the same chunk of CI, if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's cool. It's really exciting. To branch off maybe a little less from the technical side and more into like, how did you kind of run into it? And you don't have to share this if you don't want to, but like what kind of brought you into the fold with them? Because you were working with Nuxt before this, right?
Yeah. I was happy in my job and they just found me and they wanted me to work for them. And I was like, no, I have a job. I love my job. So I just said no to them straight away. And they were like, they wanted me to just have a talk, and I ended up having a conversation, but I told them that they were wasting their time, that I didn't want a job. And basically it was interesting because I had actually researched them 3 years ago when I was finding the solution for the company that I told you about, that we had this problem. Mm-hmm. And I did research Bit back then. And obviously the version has changed since then, but I struggled to be able to use it. The documentation wasn't great. There was a couple of, it wasn't easy to use and stuff. So I basically said, this looks good. This sounds great, but this is so hard to use. So I'm not, I said, no way. There's no way I could teach a team of developers it. And this is kind of very interesting as well, because like my role is also to help developers be able to use the product. And the idea is that it is easy to use, or as easy to use as possible. So I found that like after we had about 17 hours of talks and interviews and stuff. So it's a very long process. It was all me saying like no and asking questions and stuff. But I wanted to be very sure that I believed in the product. So I really wanted to know like where the product was going, what the aim was, if it really could work, like, and all these kind of questions like, but is this really going to solve? This is my problem. Can I really solve this problem by just using Bit? And I had to be sure of that, because if not, I'd be like, taking on a role that I don't believe in, and that I couldn't do. I can never advocate for something I don't believe in. So I do believe, and I've seen it with like a lot of our enterprise clients, the problems that they're solving. Like one of them, and I know this like sounds crazy to some people, but to change their logo across all their applications, we're talking about a very big customer, like very big, to change their logo across all their applications, it took 6 months. Now you might say that's ridiculous, but if you work for a massive scale enterprise where you have teams all over different countries and you have to speak to like certain people on certain team, like the head developer on that team, the senior front end on this team, whatever, and get them to update this component and etc. It took them 6 months by the time they got it all done. Like that's crazy. Whereas in Bit, you have one component, call it the logo component, and that's just installed on everyone. Then yes, the only thing that someone has to do is import the new version, right? And we have a lot of kind of cool tools as well that you can actually see, like you can import the version, see it, and then go, yes, that looks good, and test it out, and then actually update your component to use that version, whether it's the heading component, the footer component, whatever. So you're updating one component based on that one component. So it's a lot easier, it's a lot quicker. And there's a lot of other tools coming. Ripple CI is coming, which is like a CI kind of thing that will show you all the components that are going to get updated because of it. And you can see that live kind of preview, and you can go, yes, it looks good, looks good, looks good. Okay, go.
Nice. Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah, I've been playing with it internally. It's not available for anyone to use yet, but it's kind of like when I was looking at it and they're showing it to me, and I was like, okay, that's just a Figma design, but moving. And they're like, no, that's it. And I'm like, nah, it can't be. This can't be happening,
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, we again, it's one of those things to the front end. The data's there. We just needed to figure out the right visualization for it. And that's not easy to do because sometimes the data's not quite there. It needs to be massaged. But we're getting there with all of these things. Amelia Wattenberger had that visualization for GitHub of the repos as circles and things like that. And I was like, someone's going to figure out something like this for the dependency graph. And it seems like that is already the case, which is, I like being right about these things.
I think this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's amazing there that you're talking about like the process of them like getting you to take the job, because and I think that's a real lesson for people like that. Like believe in what you're doing, like actually like really ask a lot of questions about this thing, and believe in what you're doing. More and more we talk about products and not projects, and I think that is a real, like that's something that everybody should take on. Make sure that it's something that's going to fit for you.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you mentioned there, that I think earlier on you said that this, like really you learned JavaScript like 4 years ago or something like that. Like it was pretty, like
Yeah.
like that's not a great deal of time to be like to go from that to being headhunted by Beat, and then like actually you saying no, this has to be right for me. I mean, I think that's an incredible journey. Like that's like super super fast.
Yeah, no, and the thing was, they didn't hire me for my React skills because I didn't have any, right? So I was like, now you're taking the Nux developer and you're going to throw her into React and TypeScript. Like seriously, you seriously want me? Like what? So yeah, I had a lot of learning to do jumping in there.
But it's good proof as well that it's less. It can be. I mean, it really depends on the role, I suppose. But oftentimes it can be less about the practical skills you know versus your understanding of how base concepts work. So like when I started kind of recently, like being a front ender, it's 5-6 years now, but still, when I started like thinking of myself as a front ender, I didn't know JavaScript either, but I knew some PHP because I've been doing
Yeah.
WordPress sites, and I'd figured out at least how to manipulate arrays and what a loop was or a for loop and stuff. That served me well. And then it's that same idea of you've also been very good at piecing together and explaining things back, which that's a skill that I mean, again, it's one of those things that's not always highlighted as important, but it really is. Being able to say, I don't understand what you just said to me. Can we try another way of figuring it out? Not everyone does that. A lot of people just go, oh, I must be stupid because I didn't understand what that
Yeah.
person said, and not say, let's try and explain another way, or whatever it might be. It's a
It's
good
the fear of
example.
asking for help. It's a lot of people have this,
A
right?
lot of people have this. Yeah, but I think you're a great role model for saying like, no, that is a skill too, and that can move you into some crazy areas. But
Yeah.
they obviously had confidence that your strengths of asking questions and figuring out how things fit together, it didn't matter if you didn't quite know TypeScript. In fact, that's maybe beneficial
Mm.
as being able to see it with fresh eyes, stuff that they take for granted.
Yeah. No, it's definitely a massive change, definitely a big learning journey. But it's been amazing to do it because I've learned so much from it. And it's also made it like I understand things from the bottom up, right? Because I had to like come in knowing nothing, and I came from this like top of the mountain from Nux, from being like a ninja, right? I was able to build applications super quick to like now I can't even build a component. Like what's going on here? It's very frustrating, but it does kind of like as you're learning, you then know the answer to all those questions. And I do a lot of like client calls and stuff where they're
Mm.
having problems and they have a like this is the problem we're having, how can bit help us? Because then I kind of see what are developers looking for, what problems do enterprises have, what solution are they trying to find, and that kind of like helps me then to kind of see what can we then do, what kind of demos can we build for them, what kind of examples can we show them, what kind of blog posts can we write, what kind of talks can we give about it, what are people looking for. And yeah, like a lot of people are just looking for a solution to a very simple problem and they just can't find it because the front end is a mess these days, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Another follow-up question I have on this is how, like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what bit is, right? Because it's not the components themselves, right? Those are kind of you.
So you build the components, but you have to build them the way Bit wants you to build them. So for
Okay.
example, everything has to be in a folder, which is something you're not used to doing because normally you just build your component unless you're Angular and then everything's kind of like in folders. But yeah, you have to put in a folder with like an index file so that Bit can read that index file, which will obviously like be exporting the component file, and then you have like a docs file, a test file, a compositions file. Now you can decide not to write docs, not to write compositions, not to write tests. That's completely up to you. But we like to generate the component with all those files in it. So then it makes it easier for you to write the tests, to, write documentation, etc. Add the Figma embed so you can see the design right there beside your component compositions, for example. It provides a better developer experience. And now you're actually working in this dev server, like Bit provides you with the dev server. So that's your development environment. The compositions are your way of seeing that component, adding the different props in to see how it works. And your documentation is how someone can then see your component, or later on when you forget, what did I build here? With a live playground, so you can actually play with it live. So instead of like building in the application, you're now building in this like dev server, which means you're seeing your component in isolation as opposed to seeing your component in an application. Like normally I would build an application and build my components. And now I'm just like, I'm going to build one component. I'm going to build another component. I can still create an app component because an app is a component, right? And then just put those components in there and see what it would look like in the app. And then just I can put that up to the cloud so I can share with everyone. Everyone can see those components in isolation, see the app component, etc., etc.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it makes
I've confused you even more, haven't I?
No, not necessarily. It's one of those things where it's going to be hard to just
talk about it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's hard to talk about it because you're so used to working on your own machine, and as you say, you're used to working in that. Even when you have Storybook on a project, you're still kind of like, I'm going to develop the app first, and then I'm going to do the Storybook. You know, it's the same. You're supposed to do test-driven design. You write the test, and then you get the implementation to pass the test. But we don't often do that. If you do, you're great. Keep it up.
But don't get me wrong. Like it's very hard to just like take, say, a long Figma design of this application and just decide, right, I'm just going to build this component. You kind of almost start with the app, right? But then you kind of say, right, what's the first component I need? It's the header component. And then you think, okay, what's inside the header component? There's a logo. Okay, that's a component. So then you start building the logo component of the header component. And then you start like building the navigation component and the, theme toggler component to change the theme. And then you put all that in the header component. And then it's the header component that you put in the application. Now I have my application with my header component. Then I go down the page and I say, right, what's next? The hero component. Okay, what makes up the hero component? I need a button. So let's create a button. I need this. And then you have the hero component, you put the hero component in the app.
Okay. Last question then is governance, because that's the other problem I've run into before. And what I mean by that is we implemented a living style guide kind of system, and we had this design system where we had a repository we published where we said, hey, here's the header component, here's the button component, or at least it was the CSS for those. But that kind of goes hand in hand with you got to use your HTML the same way. But we didn't know what HTML or component system they would have, so it was a guideline for that. But the CSS was, please use this. Then along came a new project, and they didn't like the CSS that was being handed down to them, and they didn't like even the colors, so they just did their own. And suddenly now we had 2 button components. But then no one was responsible for saying, no, you can't have the second one. No, you can't do that. And on top of that, there wasn't any tooling to support that. So am I right in understanding that this kind of helps address that, in that there's a central place of truth for these things, and versioning and approvals or not?
I think one of the main problems, especially like even me and I'm my own, like I've had the same problem where I don't want to use someone else's component because, I can't find it. I don't know where it is. I don't know it exists. I don't trust it. And it's sometimes just quicker to build your own. So, and I did this in Bit and I'm building it on. I'm like, oh, I can build my own. And, the boss came along and he's like, that's great, Debbie, you've just built your own. So now the next person's coming in, they're going to build their own, and someone else is going to build their own. And now, like in a year's time, we're going to have a massive problem because you didn't want to just look to see if that component existed. And I was like, oops. So yeah, being able to find the component easily is very important. And that's what you can do, but you can search for it and like search for labels for name of the component. You can see the component, and you should split your components into the right kind of scopes, right? So if it's a design component, it should be in a design scope. If it's a base component, it should be in a base scope. If it's an e-commerce component, like a shopping cart, product card, it should be in the e-commerce scope. So then you know where to look for components as opposed to having 100 components just in one scope called Frontend, right? Because that's when it gets a mess. So you need to kind of like separate things out. And it's also okay to have 2 buttons if it's necessary, right? Now, there might be a time where one button needs to do something like absolutely crazy compared to the other one. And you know what? That's okay, because you don't have to over engineer everything to make it like fully this component has to be the be all and all for like 100 applications, right? You can have specific this button component. Buttons may be a bad example, but say a product card. This is a product card for a shoe store. It's only going to show stuff for shoes because it has sizes and it has like available colors and has all these other stuff that, you know, other like stores don't need, right? And then you can make that specific to that one, but it can use the components of the base that make up that component.
I think in terms of governance, though, Evan, like with that kind of thing, it kind of each company would need a product owner for the components, and that would be the single thing that people would be able to use in the product in their projects. So like I think this is something like that kind of thing is something that doesn't really get solved by the front end, right? I mean, like if somebody decides that they're going to make a separate button component, then or somebody's going to make like an offshoot of a repo, so they're kind of going to use it, but they're not really because they're going to change things, and then that kind of mess is inevitable if you don't have people actually like owning what is going in.
The same with the design team, right? So the designer knows if that component already exists, because the designer, they build in components as well. They design with components. They know what they've already created. They know if this is something new or not. So it's very easy for them to say, this is already exists. This, you need to create this. This is new. And therefore, by speaking to them, I think it's really important to kind of like build alongside the design team always and kind of have them close to close, not just, here's your design, see you later. Call me if you have any problems, right? It shouldn't be like that. And your designs can be influenced and changed by the developer and the designer if you start earlier on in the same process.
Yeah. We have a design system at Porsche, which is like they own that as a separate product, and they've done a fantastic job with it. So you get to see exactly like what the component is, how it can be configured, but then so you can import that, but it's not functionality; it's just the component, which like honestly it was mind blowing for me when I first started there, and like it was like, okay, so here's a design, and then like there were no specifications for it really. There was just like a couple of bits of configuration, which you pass into the design system, and it would create the component, and it would be exactly as it should be. Like, and I think that, and now we can actually say, oh, we need this component. Is this something that you could build for the design system? So you can make a request to them to actually build this, and then it's reusable for like the entire company. Like it really works nicely, but because it's so heavily, I want to say policed, but like that sounds like really heavy.
They thought about it and structured it out. Yeah, you have to plan things, think about it, and then you know.
And I think that kind of thing in the past maybe wasn't so well thought out. It was like, oh, we've got an idea to build like a design system, or we've got an idea to build a style guide, but then after like a year, nobody really wants to work on it, and it's like, oh yeah, that's something we did, and we're not gonna, and then it becomes like not so well maintained, and as long as it's a living product which is continually worked on, then I think it can work.
Yeah, I guess the last thing to say is it's nice to see this kind of thing growing and taking off, and for me it seems like something worth looking deeper into, at the very least because it's hitting all the right, not just buzzwords, but I don't know what the term for it is. No,
they are just buzzwords. They are just buzzwords, right?
But an example of the thing I can't find the word for is that front-enders and designers, or product owners and designers, starting to collaborate together earlier in the process. Yeah. Meaning they also there'll be more collaboration with testers at the end of the process too, bringing the whole development process, getting away from segmentation. That for me is a great mindset to go into, and that this product kind of embraces that and encourages it and moves it forward is a good sign to me. So I will say, working at a product company, as in like a single product, even though Actimo is kind of under the Kahoot umbrella, and so there's a bunch of other we're trying to merge with some other stuff. Still, like, we're not going to take on Kahoot's branding and components. Maybe we can share some like functional components, but it doesn't seem quite right for that. Same as it wouldn't for my standalone project, right? Because I'm already in a monorepo. No one cares what version of the button I've published, that sort of thing. At the same time, I know people that are starting up like consultancies are going freelance and stuff. And imagine you just start this up so that you don't have to, as you're improving your skills, you don't have to, recreate the wheel every time. And when you do, you can then backport that to the projects you worked on before, so you don't have to spend time fixing weird bugs on those projects. That seems like, for that use case, it's pretty cool too.
Yeah, I mean, it can be used for personal sites as well. But it is extra work, right? You're going to do some extra work to do this because you're going to have to think and architect things properly. It's a great project if that's what you want to do. But you do really see the value when you have to share components, when you need to build multiple applications, which is what I had to do when I worked in the agency to solve people's problems. And the companies were like, they had a hotel chain, plus they had the golf course, holiday villas, plus they had the flights, plus the other things. And then you've got all these components are being used across very many, and the design system is different, right? They have a different design, but you can still share the same components because your design, your theme gets applied later. So but it just means you actually end up saving money on developers later on, which is very sad, but it's very true, right? It's a lot more, it's easier to just hire loads of developers and have them all build loads of components, but you're going to spend a lot of money on their wages, and it's actually cheaper in the long run to have those components, maintain those components. You need a team maintaining them. It's not let's build a component library, a design system, whatever, and then see you later, our job is done and let's move on and do something else. You always have to be building and maintaining it and improving it, and the design will change. The design always changes, always improves, always gets better. So yeah, it's an ongoing thing, but you do see a lot of value when you have to, especially like large companies or companies that are using more than one application, and have teams that want to work independently and not have to have that one repo where they have to like build everything and share each other's code bases. And imagine onboarding a new developer to a massive monorepo, right? It's so hard, right? You want a new developer to come in and say, here is the e-commerce components, and that's all you have to worry about. And if you want to get a button component, this is where you just install it from here. And if you need a header component, you install it from here. But this is all you need to learn. And if you can onboard your developers quicker, you're just going to build so much faster as well.
It's also about the things that you throw away. Like, oftentimes you end up, like, hey, let's just start from scratch. It's easier. But what I've noticed is that we're not really doing that with everything. Some bits are now like plug-inable, and you might actually do them all from scratch, but you don't even notice. I'm thinking of things like the CI or the deploy process or the hosting, etc. That used to be, we've got to like tear everything down. We're going to write our Nginx files all up from scratch again, and our Apache rules and all that. Now you don't do that. You just plug into AWS bucket or something. I don't know enough about DevOps to know necessarily what I'm talking about, but that part is abstracted away, and it was the right thing to abstract away, which makes it easy to sort of swap it or whatever, and you don't derail yourself. This is now, we're trying to find that same thing for the components themselves. We do keep throwing it out and starting over. What if we didn't do that? What if, you can change out your framework, but then you're going to use similar or the same components or new versions of them, etc. It's a paradigm shift. I hope,
Yes.
I wish you guys success with that. We're coming to that time of the wrapping things up part of the show, but before that, we have our segment True Hero. In this segment, we like to highlight a few of the true front-end heroes working across the planet and to thank them for all that they do. So this time, Debbie, you've nominated Alba Silvente. Can you tell us a bit about her and why you thought of her for this?
Yeah, so Alba is from Alicante in Spain, but she's living in Amsterdam, working for passionate people. And I've seen her grow over the last, I think I met her at Alicante, is it 2 years ago now? And that was her first time seeing Nuxt. And, she started learning it, and she's literally like she's now a Nuxt ambassador, Storyblock ambassador. She's writing blog posts, creating demos, giving workshops. She was just nominated very recently as Google Developer Expert. And if you just check her out on Twitter and check out her GitHub, etc., the amount of stuff she does for the community, it is insane. I don't think she ever sleeps. And I think it's great because, she's not doing it for money. She's doing it because she wants to just share knowledge with the community. And I really respect that about her.
Brilliant. Alba, keep up the good work. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Great. And then lastly here, any proper hero is a well-rounded one. And so we like to share some simple musical picks, not musicals as in Guys and Dolls, but music choices. So we'll start with you. Scott, what's the favorite thing you've been listening to lately?
Well, if it was a musical pick, I'd go for Grease because it's the only good musical. Beauty School Dropout is a particularly amazing number. And I would definitely go for that. Although I don't know what the flying car was all about at the end. What have I been listening to? St. Vincent. She's got a film out, The Nowhere Inn, and it has a soundtrack. And I've listened to that a couple of times. Man, it is, but it's basically just like, it's not like a normal album. I would say it's a mini album. It has like snippets of music in here and there, like a couple of songs, like a couple of new songs. I'm always happy to listen to anything that she does, to be honest.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's what I've been listening to.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I'll put it on there. I saw it, but I thought it's probably not an album proper from her. So, okay.
Yeah,
thanks.
and you're right. It's not an album proper, but
Still could be good.
Yeah, exactly. We like her. So
cool. Debbie, how about you?
So I have a problem, right? I have these headphones on like 12 hours a day, and I never listen to any music because if I was to put music on, I would just sing and dance. I cannot just put music on and sit still. I can't do it. So I never listen to music. But if I do happen to put music on, it would be the Queen's Gambit, the soundtrack from the Netflix show, because there's no words in it. And it's really I just love putting that on and just listening to it. It's really cool.
Nice. Okay. That's really good. Yeah. What kind of soundtrack is it? Is it super ambient, or I saw the show, but I don't remember the music.
It's quite upbeat in a way, but
there's rhythm to it.
Yeah, you can literally
like that.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm trying to think of it now. Was it kind of jazz?
Not jazz.
No.
Classic-y kind of, but very kind of cool. I don't know. I'm so bad with kind of music terms, so forgive me.
Totally
but it's just really it's kind of strongy, kind of that's so bad explanation. See why I'm not a developer advocate for music?
That's pretty good. Okay. No, I like it. We can check that out as well. It's always good to have, I think, ambient music when you're coding. I can't I'm into singer-songwriter stuff too, but I can't do that while I'm in the zone. I get distracted by voices and lyrics. So yeah, my pick is not that. It's something also quite ambient and weird, as is usual for me. There's this I think Swedish guy who goes under the name of Go280, and it's very much chiptune bit kind of music. I don't know, as usual, hard to explain what it is. Ambient, I don't know. But there's 2 new albums that were released at the same time, Stallo and Glosson. I don't know what they are or the story behind them. I didn't do any research, but they've all got 13 tracks each of long, weird stuff. I'm super into it. Earlier stuff is definitely more chiptune, but this stuff is ambient and neat. So I've been listening to that on repeat, trying to get it into my head, which is usually how I do it with albums. It takes me a while to be like, oh yeah, I remember that feeling of that piece of music. So, yeah.
Man, we really sold those musical picks there.
Super weird.
Oh my god.
Kind of strongy.
Yeah, it's not really
strongy.
Not really a proper album,
Good. I hope everyone enjoys listening to that. So it looks like that's all the time we have for today, folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you should like, heart, or star us in your podcatcher of choice. Reviews and ratings are how the fancy algorithms help people find our content, and the power to help is within you. If you have any questions or topics you want covered in our next episode, send a tweet to us at Heroes Frontend, and we'll add it to our list. Until next time, heroes, remember, with great front-end power comes great responsibility. See you next time.
Woohoo! Love it. See ya.